Good evening. My name is Brian Almon of the Gem State Chronicle, and this is the Gem State Report for December 12th, 2025. In a few minutes, we're going to go over some of the news of the week, continue to preview the legislative session, which starts 1 month from today, and we'll also take another deep dive into our state's budget. Now, we took a look at it last week with Senator Scott Grow, who is the co-chair of the Joint Finance Appropriations Committee. Go back and check out that episode if you want to see what he's doing with the budget. Today, we're going to talk to two members of the team over at Idaho Freedom Foundation who presented their own proposed budget earlier this week. As a programming note, this is being recorded earlier in the day. As you're watching this, I'm going to be at an event, so I will not be coming to you live, so I will not be able to answer any questions or respond to any chats at the time. However, I will come back and see what you had to say after the fact. So just know that this is previously recorded. It is Friday the 12th, though. It's just earlier in the day for me. I come to you from the past with a message. So let's take a look at the news of the week. If I can figure out this screen share and stuff. There we go. All right. Make sure you visit gemstatechronicle.com. That is where everything I do is able to live. If you'd like to subscribe, there's a subscribe button up there that goes through Substack. You can subscribe for free and get 3 to 5 emails in your email inbox each week with news and commentary and analysis. Every Saturday or Sunday, I bring you a roundup, which is just kind of an overview of what I talked about that week, as well as other interesting things I happen to come across, articles and videos and such. Where's my mouse? I have 2 mice on the screen. There we go. So we are seeing what's on here. Make sure to check out our sponsors. I'll have more information about them in a few minutes. We'll talk about the Statesman and Stateswoman of the Year here in a few minutes as well. Earlier this week, I debuted a new feature. It's called Scorecard Explorer. If you want to find it, go up to Idaho Insider. It's a little drop-down menu. Go to Scorecard Explorer, as the title says. And you can select any of these 8 scorecards: the Idaho Freedom Foundation Freedom Index, the IFF Spending Index. The Club for Growth does a bill rating. John Birch Society does their own Freedom Index. They use the same name. American Conservative Union, their CPAC ratings. Idaho Association of Commerce and Industry, that's IACI, the business lobby. And then Institute for Legislative Analysis, the last 2 years, they've done an Idaho GOP platform rating where they compare legislation based on their interpretation of the Idaho Republican Party platform. This year, they also added one comparing legislation to the National Republican Party platform. Now, a platform is just a statement of principles and goals that a party puts out. The Idaho GOP puts one out every 2 years at our state convention. The National Republican Party does it every 4 years at their national convention at the same time that they nominate a presidential candidate. And it usually represents that presidential candidate's agenda. So the current National Republican platform is President Trump's agenda. So choose one of those. We'll start with the Freedom Index, and bam, it populates. It's amazing. Thank you, Google Gemini, for helping me script this. I already had all the data in the background because each of these legislators, it's Senator Zeiderfeld here on top, it has that information over here, and that also auto-populates. When I first made this last year, so these profile pages and Idaho Insider as an entire concept grew out of what I called the primary pulse. It was I like alliteration. It was profiles of all the Republican primary candidates. Once the primary was done, I figured, I should keep this around. So I created Idaho Insider, and it grew and grew and grew and grew. So the scorecards, originally I was hand inputting all of those, and it took forever. There's 105 legislators, which means there's 105 legislator profile pages, which meant a lot of work to go in and edit 105 pages every time a new scorecard comes out. So working with AI tools like Gemini, I was able to put all that information in the back end. So I can just update a single file. Just go down and add score, bam, 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 105 times, and it will automatically update here. It's very cool. Makes it a lot easier on me. It's like, having a full-time assistant working for me. So all that data was there. as you can see there. So I figured, why not make it sortable? So score sorted up. Congratulations, Representative Birch. He has the lowest Freedom Index score. Sort it down, sort it by district. So you see District 1, District 2, District 3. You can sort it by chamber, or you can filter by chamber. Let's just look at the House or the Senate. Senate's smaller. Or just look at Senate Democrats, all 6 of them. So there you go. Who's the highest scoring Senate Democrat? Senator Ward Engelking. Almost 38%. It's actually not too bad. I mean, low expectations, of course. And so you can do that for all of these. You can see the ILAs and switch back to both and both. It's very quick, very responsive, very easy to use. You can switch back to 2024. Scott Herndon, who was in the Senate then and is running, to try and be there again next year, had the highest rating, tied with Senator Lenny, Senator Carlson, and Senator Nichols. So yeah, check that out. That is called Scorecard Explorer. I should actually put that title up there, Scorecard Explorer. You can find that on the dropdown for Idaho Insider. And just one more thing I wanted to mention while I'm here is that this legislative branch page, which has these tables with all the legislators. Once again, originally when I made this, it was 100% manual, hand crafted. It took not quite as long as all the profile pages. But again, I figured the data's there. So I should be able to script something that just generates it dynamically. And that is now the case. If you're on mobile, you won't see the thumbnails because it crowds it too much. But if you're on desktop or a larger screen, you'll be able to see them. And again, they're dynamically inserted. So say, Representative Don Hall, he was just appointed by the governor a couple weeks ago to fill a vacancy out in the Magic Valley. Once he gets a new picture, if he, this January, he goes in for the session and gets his picture taken, maybe in December when they have their organizational meeting, I'll be able to just upload it to the site and it will automatically pick up that new picture and insert it. The same thing with Representative Vila. I'll have to ask how that's pronounced. Vila, Vil. Anyway. So yeah, another fun thing. Just trying to make this as useful to you as possible, but also as easy for me to keep updated, because that's the whole point. If it just falls behind and starts to have stale data, then what's the point? It's not useful at all. So that is Idaho Insider. Personally, Idaho Insider is more important than my columns. I enjoy sharing my analysis and my thoughts on things, but the tools that I'm putting at Gem State Chronicle are, I think, even more important because they help you get involved. They help you to learn more about the people who are representing you in government. And once you know those things, then you can be more engaged. You can hold them accountable. You can, it helps in campaigns, whether you're supporting someone or opposing them. It helps to know how to contact them during the session so that you can tell them whatever's on your mind. I always say that if you're not speaking to your legislators, then someone else is, and that someone else is probably a special interest or a lobbyist who might not have the same shared principles and values that you do. So it's important to stay involved. Yesterday, I had an article up about IACI, the Idaho Association of Commerce and Industry. And as I say here at the beginning, they've kind of become a byword for the globalist establishment, and it's easy to just rail against them. But I really wanted to dig in and figure out exactly what they are. It is an association of Idaho businesses. And you see this all the time with other businesses as well, or other organizations. They come together to associate, to pool their resources, and to maybe elect a spokesman to speak on their behalf. And that's really what this is. It has grown pretty powerful, though, especially since our current governor is a former chairman of the board of IACI. So these are his people. I want to be careful not necessarily to ascribe anything that's nefarious. They're not necessarily sitting in there, thinking about ways to destroy Idaho. They think they're doing what's right for their people. I think we as conservatives have a different view. What's good for Micron is not necessarily what's good for Idaho, or at least the people of Idaho. That harkens back to the old saying that what's good for GM is what's good for America. And that's not always the case, especially when these companies are firing people for not taking experimental vaccines, when they're outsourcing and offshoring jobs, and instead of hiring Idahoans, they're either outsourcing them to foreign countries, or bringing in H-1B visa holders, or bringing in migrant labor, or even illegal migrant labor. That's not necessarily good for Idaho either. I don't think lower prices on potatoes and milk is worth cutting in the people of Idaho out of these jobs. That's just my opinion. But yeah, go check it out. I just talk about what IACI is. I found this really interesting. So this is, I plotted IFF Freedom Index scores against the IACI scores, because IACI has a scorecard too. And they're almost perfectly inverse. That means if you have a high score on the Freedom Index, you're going to have a low score on IACI's, and vice versa. Now, and that's 2024. 2025, that difference changed. I mean, it's still inversely correlated, but not as much. The conservatives grew in power, and the business establishment kind of retreated a little bit. Now they're going to strike back. They're going to try and win back some seats in the next primary. But this is how things go. This is the ongoing battle. It never ends. So yeah, that's a list of all the companies that I can confirm are somehow part of IACI, because they have members that are part of IACI's board of directors. It's a very large board of directors. Lots of folks who are very influential in Idaho politics, and also who employ a lot of Idahoans. Don't get me wrong, even though I complain about outsourcing and offshoring and H-1Bs and such, they do employ a lot of people. According to Alex LeBeau, the president of IACI, IACI member organizations, member corporations employ about half the people of Idaho, or half the working age people of Idaho, which is not something you can just ignore. So yeah, I just wanted to go into detail about who the organization is, who makes it up, and what their goals are, and are they really aligned with conservative principles, or have they gone astray? So go ahead and check that out. The Statesman and Stateswoman of the Year. Each year for the past 3 years now, the Gem State Chronicle has named a statesman and a stateswoman who I believe really exemplify the ideals of public service. Think back to our founding fathers. They would look back at, say, the great heroes of Rome and Greece as their inspiration. And now we look back to the founding fathers as inspiration. So, George Washington was often compared to Cincinnatus. He was a Roman leader in the Old Republic, not the Star Wars Old Republic, but the Old Roman Republic, who twice he was called upon to act as dictator. Now, back then, the word dictator didn't have a negative connotation. It just meant that in times of crisis, when the Senate and the consuls, the leaders of Rome, could not act quickly enough, the Senate would say, well, we're going to elect a dictator. He has a certain length of time that he's in power, and it's for a certain purpose to solve this crisis. But during that time, and for that purpose, he has basically unlimited authority. So it's like electing a temporary king, although the Romans hated the idea of kings, so it was different. So twice, Cincinnatus was elected dictator to deal with invasions, and both times he, raised an army, defeated the invader, and then went back to his farm. And so he was held up by the Romans themselves as this ideal, and our founding fathers followed that as well. George Washington himself, he led the Continental Army in the Revolutionary War. After the war was over, he probably could have become the King of America, but he didn't want to. He wanted to go back to Mount Vernon. When he was elected the first president of the United States, he served for one term, ran for a second, served for a second. He would have won a third. And had he done so, he likely would have died in office and established a precedent that presidents are elected for life. Instead, he chose to step down at the end of 2 terms and go back home and passed away quietly. And that established the precedent that the American presidency is not a life term, at least for everybody not named Franklin Roosevelt. So those are the people we look up to. And I wanted to, honor people that I felt were exemplifying those values. People who were walking the walk, talking the talk, who were effective, who were, examples of citizen legislators. So for the Statesman of the Year, this year, there were a lot of good choices, and I went back and forth, but I ended up picking Representative Jordan Redmond. He's done some amazing work. He's really, just in 3 legislature, he's really made his mark. He's, I think, one of the hardest working legislators. He sits on, he's the vice chair of a regular committee, but he's also, in addition to 2 others, he's also on like 6 other interim committees during the summer. So not bad for a part-time job. He also has sponsored and carried a lot of legislation regarding healthcare, trying to get through sideboards on Medicaid expansion. They couldn't get the full sideboard bill through, the one with the trigger that if the certain thresholds were not met, that Medicaid expansion would be automatically repealed. But he did get a massive reform of the system. He carried a bill to exclude candy and soda from SNAP benefits. Go ahead and read it. He's done a ton of stuff, and also, his personal life. He and his wife own multiple businesses. They operate a charity up in North Idaho that's done a lot of great work. So very cool guy, and I think he well deserves this. And then today, I published its Woman of the Year, and if you can't tell by the thumbnail there, who it's referring to, it is, of course, Representative Barbara Ehart. She was a Division I basketball player and coach, and that is what really motivated her to fight for protecting women's sports. Back in 2000, she carried House Bill 500, which said that if you're a boy, you cannot play on the girls' team in high school or college. Seems obvious, but we live in crazy times, and so this was necessary. At the time, no other state had come out and done this. This was the first time a state declared that boys have to play on the boys' team. And Representative Ehart got a lot of flack for it, but she also got a lot of attention. And she was able to travel the country with people like Riley Gaines and speak at other legislatures. And earlier this year, President Trump issued an executive order that was basically following in the footsteps of Representative Ehart's legislation. So that was a huge victory. It's, of course, the ACLU sued over it. It's going to be in the Supreme Court in January, is the oral arguments, and Representative Ehart will be there to see them. There's a link there to her testimony during the COVID-19 Response Study Committee earlier this year, where she reminded people what actually happened, how the government shutdowns affected people, the stay-at-home orders and the lockdowns, how they traumatized people. And she's been a champion for that as well. So go check that out. Thank you to Representative Ehart and Representative Redmond for great work over the past, several years. They've both been there a while. Representative Ehart a little bit longer, but they're both, I think, setting an example for what our legislators should be. So I'm going to do a little ad read here, and then we will talk about the budget. I'll be right back. Lynn Bradescu is a longtime resident of Boise, a Republican district chair, a philanthropist, and a patriot. She's also a realtor by trade. If you're moving to Boise or have any questions about the Boise real estate market, talk to Lynn. She knows Boise. Visit Lynn Bradescu's Keller Williams Realty at lynnbradescu.kw.com. Thank you, Lynn, for supporting the Gem State Chronicle. Indeed. So last week, I talked to Senator Scott Grow. He is my state senator in my district, but he is also the co-chair of the Joint Finance Appropriations Committee. So for those of you who might not know, the Joint Finance Appropriations Committee, JFAC, you'll hear that acronym a lot. They are the budget writing committee for the legislature. So every year, the governor and the state agencies that are actually going to use the money, they present a proposed budget. Now, constitutionally, it's the legislature that chooses a budget. They don't even need to listen to the governor if they don't want to. But, since he's the chief executive and all the agencies that report to him are the ones who are actually using all this money, they're saying, okay, this is what we need to continue operations. A lot of it is defined by statute. The legislature 20 years ago, 50 years ago, passed a law that says this agency shall have this power and do this and that. Okay, well, here's the money we need to do it, so please give it to us. And that's the appropriations process. So at the beginning of the year, the governor, 1 month from today, January 12th, 2026, the governor will go and give his State of the State and budget address. He will come into the House chamber, talk about how, all the great work he's doing, and present his proposed budget. And then JFAC will take that proposed budget and start digging into it. And they'll say, well, does this agency really need this line item? Or how much should we actually devote to this? Last year, in his State of the State, the governor asked for $100 million in tax cuts. And House leadership said, well, let's do $400 million. And they did, which is good for us. However, their revenue projections turns out to have been a little too optimistic. You see, in order to, how to make this simple, constitutionally, we need a balanced budget, and the fiscal year goes from July to June. That means the legislature, which meets from January to April, must figure out how much tax money is going to come in over the next 18 months. And then that gives them how much money that they can actually spend, how much they can appropriate to each of these agencies, each of these divisions. So, let's say they do their projections. Okay, we're going to get $8 billion in tax revenue. Okay, we can spend $8 billion. I don't remember off the top of my head what the actual numbers are, but you can look them up. They're all public. They're all online. Well, this year, it turns out that their projections might have been a little too high because the tax revenue is coming in a bit under projections. Now, if you watched my interview with Senator Groh last week, you know that he doesn't believe this is a problem, that we're going to be okay. We'll just trim the budget a little bit and everything's going to be fine. Others are saying, they're running around like chicken little with his head cut off. The sky is falling, to mix some metaphors there. And of course, everybody's viewing it through their own partisan lens. You have the anti-school choice people, Democrats and some unfortunate Republicans who are saying, that's the $50 million that you allocated to the parental choice tax credit. That's the problem, which is kind of ridiculous. On the other side, we conservatives who think that the launch grant was a bad idea to begin with are saying, well, the launch grant is $80 million. Maybe we should cut that back and that can fix the problem. And there's also, everybody has their own pet issues that they want to see cut. Well, earlier this week on Monday, Idaho Freedom Foundation presented a proposed budget, and their proposed budget would cut $1.9 billion. I don't remember if that's from the 2026 budget or from the fiscal year 2027 proposed budget, because some of the agencies have already come out with their proposed budgets. You can go see them at the Division of Financial Management website. The governor hasn't officially given his budget. He'll do that next month. But anyway, so let's watch a few minutes of that press conference that Idaho Freedom Foundation hosted to give their budget presentation. So I'll get quicker at this as the season goes on, I'm sure. All right, take it away, Ron.
Conservative budget for Idaho. I'm Ron Nate, the president of the Idaho Freedom Foundation, and I just want to thank you again for being here and for the opportunity to speak to you and to speak to elected leaders, to speak to the governor if he happens to be around. Maybe he can watch this later if he's not here. But for years, the Idaho Freedom Foundation has provided Idahoans with clear tools to evaluate government performance. The Idaho Freedom Index has helped bring more conservative legislators to the Capitol, driven more conservative voting records, and improved the quality of legislation moving through the process. 5 years ago, we expanded our work at the Idaho Freedom Foundation to include an Idaho Spending Index, tracking how legislators vote on budgets and spending bills, and how the governor votes on them. The results are troubling. In the 2025 legislative session, the average spending index score was 39%, meaning 61% of the time legislators were voting for bigger, bloated budgets. And we saw those budgets pass. That is not conservative budgeting, and it is why Idaho now faces a self-inflicted spending and tax deficit. For years, we have documented the state's rapid spending growth, 60% increase over the last 6 years. Just a few years ago, you may remember, Idaho had a $2 billion budget going into a legislative session. At that time, the Idaho Freedom Foundation was still recommending restraint on spending so that the government would not overcommit to programs that they would not be able to sustain when the tax collections were not coming in quite as high. In fact, if the government had done that, there would have been plenty of room for significant tax cuts right at a time when families were struggling under Biden inflation. Those warnings were not taken seriously, and today Idaho is feeling the consequences. An old episode of the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, he had then presidential candidate Ronald Reagan on his show. And Johnny asked him, how do you get the budget under control? How do you stop with the deficits? And Ronald Reagan turned to him and said, well, it's the same way you protect your virtue. You learn to say no. Now, Ronald Reagan couldn't even keep that promise. We did have deficits during the Reagan years, but I am urging our legislature and our governor to say no, to stop it with the excessive spending and excessive increases. Idaho does not have a budget problem. We have a budgeting problem. The whole process is rigged, is set up to encourage expansion. Agencies request their budgets every fall. Then the governor adjusts and tweaks them, and and brings them to the legislature. The Joint Finance and Appropriations Committee hears from the agencies. They will do tweaks and whatnot to the governor's budget. And then the legislature rubber stamps nearly every single budget the JFAC committee recommends. And so the whole process rewards the voting on bigger and bigger budgets every year. The final product is a stack of maintenance budgets and enhancement budgets, growing government and spending more year after year. The process rewards spending, not restraint. It creates photo opportunities and warm feelings among legislators and the governor for sporting new programs and projects, but leaves the taxpayers, the families, with higher bills and fewer options for genuine tax relief. Inflation and population growth do not justify these spending increases. I'll say that again. Inflation and population growth do not justify the magnitude of the spending increases we've been seeing. The expansion goes far beyond those. You will hear more about the numbers from our team in a moment. Today, the Idaho Freedom Foundation is offering a different approach. A conservative budget for Idaho is built on a limited role of government, a focus on what is necessary rather than what is simply desirable, and a return to stable, sustainable funding levels that existed before the rapid growth of COVID spending sprees in recent years. A conservative approach makes room for real tax relief. Repealing the grocery tax and phasing out property taxes could both be done, while ensuring the core functions of government are funded responsibly but not recklessly. Our policy team will walk you through how Idaho reached this point, what the real numbers look like, how a conservative budgeting framework will correct the course. Fred Birnbaum, our senior policy fellow and former legislative affairs director, will explain Idaho's recent budget history and the extent of the current fiscal imbalance. He'll be followed by Brett Farruggia, our budget policy specialist, and he will outline our conservative budget for Idaho and the path toward long-term sustainability.
All right, I'm going to stop it there just because you can go watch the entire thing yourself. I don't need to, share the whole thing here. But basically, Fred will go through the history, and then Brett, the new budget policy analyst, will present the budget, which you can actually go read at idahofreedom.org. But I'm going to bring on Fred and Brett to talk about it and answer some of the questions I had about it here in just a moment. Now, as Ron was talking there, I was thinking about it. He says we don't have a budget problem, we have a budgeting problem. And of course, it's you can also say that we don't have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem. It's not that revenues came in too low. Revenues have been fine. They're up this year than they were last year. It's just a little under projections. We're just spending too much. And what I like to remind people is that the governor and the agencies have been able to have their cake and eat it too. The last decade has been a period of enormous economic growth in Idaho and population growth. And with that, that means revenues, tax revenues, income taxes and sales taxes, which fund the state government, have gone up, even though taxes actually have calmed down. And that's where they have their cake and eat it too, because the governor's been able to sign all these bills cutting taxes, and he'll go on the campaign trail and go to the Lincoln Day dinners next spring saying, I cut taxes. And he's right. They've cut taxes. Our taxes have gone down. Just a few years ago, state income taxes were, 6-7%. Now they're down to 5.3%. Flat taxes, personal and corporate. So they've dropped them. They're also diverting some sales taxes over to property tax relief. They've expanded the grocery tax credit. So they're giving all this money back, or, I guess that's not the right way to say it. They are very generously allowing us to keep more of our own money. And of course, it can be more if they would stop spending so much. But my point is, up until this point, they've been able to do that. They've been able to do both, to increase spending and say, look, we are funding education. Historic and unprecedented investments in public education is what they always say. We are funding transportation. We're funding healthcare. We're funding this. We're funding that. And all the people who get funded by those things, they think that's great. And of course, they've been able to come to us and say, we are cutting your taxes. It's not the government's money, it's your money. And so they're doing both. Well, this year looks like that's finally coming to an end, which is why I said at the very first time that the revenue projections started coming in under, is that this is not a catastrophe, it's an opportunity, because now they're finally going to have to cut spending. They're finally going to have to go through these budgets, and instead of just giving the agencies everything they want, or most of what they want, they're actually going to have to start saying no, like Ron Nate said. They're going to have to say, no, sorry, we just don't have the money. They're not going to be able to increase taxes because, well, after all these tax cuts and it being an election year, that would be political suicide. They do have a rainy day fund, which they might try to tap into. I mean, that's what it's for, I guess, if they think that the revenue shortfall is just going to be temporary. But if it's going to be structural, if it's just going to increase year after year, then yeah, we need to cut spending. Wayne Hoffman, former president of IFF, actually had an interesting Substack recently that you should go check out, where he suggested that they're going to try and raise taxes on unpopular stuff like vapes. That'll be interesting to see if they try. I'm not a big fan of sin taxes, where you put on taxes on smoking or drinking or gambling or whatever. Not that yeah, that's a whole nother discussion about what the government should do about vice. I've actually got some articles on it. It's a tough subject. But sin taxes, I don't like them overall because it shows that taxes can be used to change behavior, and I'm not sure the government should necessarily, be doing that. And also, it creates a problem because if you use sin taxes to fill a hole in your budget, and once they work as designed and decrease consumption, then you're going to have that hole in your budget again. I watched this happen in my old home state of Washington many times. They'd raise taxes on cigarettes, raise taxes on alcohol, and then that tax money would, it would go up and then it would start decreasing. And so they'd raise the taxes even higher. And, you're paying 5 times the cost of a pack of cigarettes just, on taxes. So yeah, that'll be interesting. Go find Wayne's Substack and read it and see, pay attention this session and see if somebody starts floating that idea. Anyway, without further ado, let's bring on Fred Birnbaum and Brett Farruggia. Fred, I've known him for several years, very intelligent, very interesting. He knows more about budgets than anyone I've ever met, and I always enjoy learning from him. Brett is new at IFF. Fred stepped back a little bit from legislative affairs director to, I think, senior policy analyst or something to that effect. Leaving more of the day-to-day operation of budget analysis with Brett. So they presented not only their budget, but also the back end of their budget, the formulas they're using to come up with this. They didn't just randomly go through and make up numbers. So let me see if I can find that for you and play the interview. Fred Birnbaum and Brett Farruggia of Idaho Freedom Foundation, who presented a conservative budget for Idaho earlier this week. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having us.
Yes.
So, Fred, I guess just tell us, what is this budget all about?
Well, again, thanks, Brian, for having us. And I think what this budget is about in a nutshell is returning Idaho to a sustainable path on budgeting. There's an old saying, change before you have to. And I think, unfortunately, at all levels of government, with spending and deficits and debt, often we change after we have to. And Idaho has a balanced budget, and that's a fact. But this year, meaning the current fiscal year, 26, and the next fiscal year, as has been widely reported, the state faces a deficit. And so our conservative budget is a way to address a structural deficit, which we believe is now what it is, on an ongoing basis. So in other words, not just do some one-time tweaks, but to change the path of spending so that Idaho is on a sustainable fiscal path.
It's interesting what you said at the beginning about changing before you have to. I remember our lieutenant governor at a Lincoln Day saying that the hard lesson for the legislature is that you have to, you have to make change in the good years, because it's not the bad years that'll kill you, it's the good years, which is interesting considering, I don't think he has necessarily a reputation for cutting spending quite a bit. But that seems to be, people agree on the problem. I was talking to Senator Groh last week, the co-chair of JFAC, and he was saying, yeah, we're going to have to cut. So I guess the question is, what and where can we agree on that we need to cut?
So before I turn it over to Brett, I just want to talk a bit about some assumptions that we think are necessary as you look at this. So, nationally in the country, of course, we all remember COVID, unfortunately. We remember the masks, we remember the vaccines, but we need to also remember the fact that the federal government shotgunned out a ton of money. And Idaho at all levels was the recipient of over $22 billion. And typically at that time, Idaho was appropriating at the state level $9 billion. And the $22 billion included checks to people, money to the state, money to cities. And that money does flow through the economy and into coffers, government coffers through taxes. So what it did is it unleashed a lot of spending. And so when Idaho accepted the ARPA money, the governor did promote a bill that said, hey, this money should be used because we're borrowing for our grandkids for things like deferred maintenance, capital projects. It should not feed ongoing spending. And it ended up feeding ongoing spending. So what we're proposing and what we did is we said, well, let's go back to before COVID, which would be fiscal 20. And let's look at what spending would have grown if it had grown by a limitation of population and inflation. In other words, taking those into account, where would we be? And then our model, which Brett developed, and he can go into detail, said, okay, if we need to be under 13 billion to essentially grow at that rate, and the agencies have asked for about 14.5 billion, how do we get there? So what our model did was take the agency requests and make cuts and adjustments such that we would get back to the sustainable path that we should have been on if we had just extrapolated the spending from the COVID period, if that makes sense.
Honestly, it boggles my mind that, there are projections of revenue shortfalls and we have to have a balanced budget, and the governor's ordered these 3% cutbacks in, non-education spending. And yet all the agencies came back and asked for above and beyond in their fiscal year 2027 budget. It's like they just assume that the money will just appear somewhere, like we're the federal government, we can just print it.
Well, I'd like to get into the model a bit with Brett, but just to kind of respond to that, I think that is another issue, a parallel issue, and that's the structure of budgeting issue, which is agencies are, and they might disagree with my characterization, but I would say they're budgeting in a silo. So one of the things a governor and or a legislature could do would be to set an overall spending target. And let's just say that it was, I'm just using some round numbers, roughly 14.1 billion in fiscal 26. That's actually very close to what it was. And the governor said, look, we're having a revenue shortfall. We have to come in at 14 this year. It would be 100 million less. And then the agencies essentially would compete for funds based on how well they executed, their various programs, evaluation of needs. So they would actually be competing so that they stayed under that target. Instead, they view themselves as independent entities, and they're going to ask for what they think they need to do. So then you just gross all that up. And that's why you got what you just mentioned, which is a actual increase in the budget, even though the revenue picture says we're getting less revenue. So there is a mismatch there. And obviously the governor hasn't presented his budget. Just so for your listeners, the agencies submit their requests. They're not done in a vacuum. Obviously they're executive agencies. Not all of them. There's some constitutional officers, but mainly executive agencies. And then the governor reviews those further, and then in January he'll present another budget. And it could be similar, it could be a lot different, but if it's not a lot different, then we won't cut the budget enough to balance it.
So tell us about this model.
Yeah, so I'd like to get into that a little bit, and I'll show it in a second, but I just want to say before, so that paper we presented on at the Capitol Presser, this is basically built directly off some template pages in the LSO's budget book that they released. So the point of making it exactly like you see is that it directly aligns with how the LSO and the legislators will see the budget come January, come the beginning of session. So we thought that was really important, that it was built to look exactly like that, so that there was a one-to-one correlation between that and the LSO, so that you could compare them side by side. So I thought that was just important to mention off the bat. So I'm going to bring it up. So here's one of many tabs, but this tab looks most like the one we presented. This is basically an Excel version of that one we presented. So how this works is this page is going to show what you saw handed out at the Capitol, 2026, 2027 agency requests. We have a line for the governors we're waiting on, and then we have ours, which is obviously you see for education, it's lower. So this is the front end. This is how it outputs, but then this is the back end. So this is specifically for all funds. So we have a general funds page and an all funds page. And how this is going to work is we take the budget requests, the DFM budget requests, we run them through not only a manual check that I do, but I also spent a week or two writing a program so that we can put the budget information. It's a big giant packet. It's like 120 or 500 pages if it's the health and welfare budget. You put that in, it's going to pull out your maintenance request, which is basically what it takes to keep the lights on, or what they say it takes to keep the lights on, just flat, no change. We're not going to grow the budget at all outside of their benefits and their CEC. And then so that we pull the maintenance out, we pull their benefits out, we pull their change in CEC is change in employee compensation, we pull that out so that we can actually have variables and mess with those numbers as well. If we want to say 1.5% or 1 or 0.5%, or there's been some controversy over how much healthcare is going to rise. So we have the ability to change those variables, and then we produce our maintenance budget, where you'll see here is the same. We've left it at 1% CEC in our presentation. And then over here is the fun stuff. So over here on these lines, there's many lines. There's stuff to do with Doge. Over here is enhancements. So we pull all the enhancements out they're asking for as well. You can see the total for the schools. They're asking for $239 million in enhancements. I know it's a negative number there, but the way it adds out is negatives become positive. That's why it's a blue. So that's a growth in the budget of $239 million. But the fun stuff is mostly right here in the middle. These are the adjustments we can make to every agency. And these are specific programs that we wanted to pull out. We pull their wages out, we pull the program costs out, and then these will be subtracted from the budget based on this code over here, which is, you see M would associate with tab M. So that would subtract the 50 million. This is a grant for special education from the federal government. And the concern here, why we, just as an example, the reason we pulled this out is because the federal grant will run out. And then, sorry, this is a standalone grant, but there is a federal grant. This one, sorry, incorrect. This one is a federal grant for $80 million for childcare. This is going to run out. And then what they'll do is they'll go to the state and ask for the 80 million in state funds to cover when the federal runs out. So that's why we're concerned about something like that. This is a 50 million grant for special education that we believe there's going to be some pushback on. This is IDLA,
the Digital Learning
Academy, which has many problems associated with it. And then this is what the 3% cut that the governor left out to education, 82 million. This is 3% of their general fund funds, 82 million, we're going to cut to their discretionary spending is what we're asking for. So that's kind of how the back end is built. This is just one example of the education. So we have numerous others. There's Medicaid expansion right there. So that's how we can build it. And I think what's really interesting is throughout, this time and during the session and all that, we can move numbers and stuff around depending on what's going on. And if someone wants to see how the budget would look, if it has this in it or not that, or we change their CEC or their benefits change, it can all be built out with just relatively simple keystrokes and chains of numbers now. So we have a good basis to be able to look at the budget, update the budget, see how different things will play out in the budget. And we've done this for every agency. We have, all their enhancements and line items and other spreadsheets. So there's a lot that can be done to analyze the budget. And as the session goes on, it's very hard to decide or look at a budget like the DOT's budget I always bring up. Well, do they need 6 excavators? I can't tell you. But as we get into the session and as you hear probably testimony from these agencies about what is required, we might have to look at enhancements that they want and maybe change stuff like that. But that's what I think the model is very powerful for, is to be able to go through and change all of that just based on the information we get. And obviously we've produced a budget number 1.9 billion about that we think less reduction that we think is reasonable, just looking at the programs we can see right now.
So just a couple of points I'll add to that, because for some of your listeners, viewers, that sounds like a lot of math, and here's a big Excel model, just kind of getting into the sort of the why and the how. For those of us, so this will be my 12th session, and typically the way the budgeting has worked is that the governor presents this budget he has developed in an 800-page book, and it's a static model, right, Brian? It's a book with pages in it. And as they review agencies and they make decisions on whether an agency,
something like this,
they make decisions on whether an agency should get more or less money, you really don't know what is the final output going to look like. And really, we don't know that almost to the end of the session. So the advantage of having this model, and I'll just give you an example, is you could, after say, a month, and they've reviewed some major agencies and you kind of get an idea of where JFAC is going, you could plug that in and then you make some assumptions, based on the trends of these other agencies, where it will end up. And you could say, well, gee, this looks like an insufficient cut, or this is going to be a cut that'll get us within 100 million. And so that people could make some real-time decisions. LSO, and I probably should say this for the benefit of your audience, it's the Legislative Service Office, and they have a budget division, budget and policy division. They obviously have databases and models, but it's not really accessible and visible to the public that shows the total. And so we can help the public and legislators with sort of a running total. Obviously, you've got every month that passes, you have new revenue data, right? And that can be filtered in here as well. And of course, there's going to be discussions and maybe some decisions at some point during the session on what do we pull from the rainy day funds, if anything. And then if the tax policy is passed on conformity, that'll certainly impact the revenue number. And if you know where your revenue is going, obviously to have a balanced budget, that sets a cap on the spending. So a lot of stuff here. I think the big difference from what we did in the past is we have a live, real-time, actionable model, as opposed to looking at just agency spending and requests discretely.
I think that's fantastic. It gives more tools not only to voters, citizens, people who call their legislators, but the legislators themselves. They're going to be thrown in there into the session dealing with hundreds of bills, and those obviously on JFAC have even more work. So I hope that'll be helpful and useful to them as they actually, try and find ways to fix this. A couple of questions I had. My biggest one is, how much of this can be done in JFAC, but how much is actual policy, like removing Medicaid expansion? That has to be a bill that goes
Right.
through the legislature. And that's the big chunk of this, 1.9 billion. But what about the other ones? How much can JFAC do to trim these budgets?
So a lot of it, there's some portions that are policy, but anything that's basically a reduction and not, a total elimination or total ending of a program, you can do in JFAC. So stuff like this 82 million to discretionary spending in the schools. If you say, well, we're going to cut discretionary spending by X number of $1 million, then that's something that JFAC can do. That's not a policy change. It's a budget reduction, especially because schools have 400-ish million in discretionary spending, I believe. So that's money that they can pick and choose what to spend on. So there's not really policy modifications there. And the other thing you can do is these are full removals, right? This is 26.7 for IDLA. Who knows if they would actually, totally get rid of it? We would want them to, but they can also do reductions to these budgets, and those aren't policy changes. So yes, removing the IDLA in its whole out of text would actually be a policy change, right? But you could also severely reduce their budget without having to venture into, is this a policy change? Do we have to go to, has to venture outside of JFAC and things like that? Do you have anything else to add to that?
That's a great question, Brian. So obviously Medicaid expansion, or Medicaid and Medicaid expansion per se, because it's a joint federal state program and it's in code. And once you sort of sign up for it, you'd have to make policy changes to reduce it, because people who are then therefore eligible, you can't say, well, we're only going to give you half the benefit. So that's obviously a big one. But to Brett's point, I think there's two things. Yes, JFAC can reduce budgets without eliminating the agency, but there's actually something that you brought up I think is interesting, which is something JFAC may not have done. I'm sure they've done it, but they don't do it frequently recently, which is they could actually recommend or request of the germane committee, hey, we've looked at this, the agency presented, I don't want to pick on digital learning, but maybe I will. We just think we don't want to fund it, so we're actually requesting a policy bill, and we'll write a trailer bill to zero it out, as opposed to take it from 20-something million down to 5 or something. And so they might say, look, as the budgeting agency, we have to balance the budget, and we're actually requesting these changes. They do have a couple of tools, not more than a couple, but they have a number of tools. They can write intent language, which puts handcuffs, and of course they've done that with the ITD bill as related to the State Street location. Hey, you can't sell this. So they actually have leeway. But one of the things people forget, JFAC sets the pay and benefit for state employees, the change.
Yep.
And that's a big number. I mean, if they said we're giving a 1% versus a 2 versus a 4, and once they make that decision, it's shotgunned in each and every bill. So if you're on the floor and you happen to disagree with we call it the CEC, change in employee compensation, really your only avenue is just to vote down the bill and say, look, I'm voting down everything until you revisit the CEC. That hasn't been done, and I'm not suggesting they do it. But JFAC picks the revenue number. JFAC picks the suggested pay raise, and then, like I said, it goes in all the bills that have people that get pay. And then they also pick the benefits piece. And actually the benefits piece, meaning health care and every other associated benefit, is probably going to cost more. The change in the benefits is going to cost more, at least at this juncture.
Yeah, it will at this juncture.
Far more than the likely pay raise. And just so your audience, they understand how that works, is that Idaho is largely self-insured with some tweaks. So there's a totality of cost, and you divide the totality of cost by the number of employees, and you get a cost ascribed per employee. And that covers the employee and their dependents, right? So if the total consumption is X hundred million and you have 20-some thousand employees, there's an allocation per employee. And then the decision is, how much does the taxpayer or the state pick up, and how much does the employee? that whole thing is done in JFAC. So that's a major policy decision. So yes, some of the policy decisions would require germane committees to write bills, but a lot of them could be done within JFAC, certainly. And there's a mixture because, as Brett alluded to, you could reduce an agency substantially without a policy bill, but to probably pull it out of code, you would need one. So that's actually sort of a 1-2 punch, because it works the other way. Remember when they add new programs, JFAC runs a trailer bill to pay for them. And so you would just kind of do the reverse. You would, if you eliminate it, you would run a trailer bill to zero them out.
I did have a couple of questions about some of the specific items,
Sure.
some of the larger cuts that show up, like cutting 34% from the Office of the Governor. What
Yes.
specifically is that?
So specifically in the Office of the Governor, a big chunk of that is launch under the Workforce Development Council. I believe it's about 85, 86 million. The other cuts are a combination of some smaller programs, and this was one of the agencies that we decided to scrutinize and cut at a larger degree. You'll see those 89 million cuts to fastest growing agencies on some of our pie charts. That we looked at, you can actually see it here. This is a tab we have in our spreadsheet that we did some numbers with inflation to see how big these grew. And if we go to, where's our Office of the Governor? Self-governing agencies. Where are we? Governor, but it's that. Yeah, see this one? 150% that's its growth over inflation. It's like 300% from based on nominal numbers. So we looked at a couple of these agencies and said, we're going to give them bigger cuts. What we're working on now, you see our website has some stuff. We're by the end of this week probably going to have a line item of what's happening in each one of these agencies. It's going to be a page for each agency. So this is partly discretionary on their part, though. We're saying, you've grown so fast, we want to cut you, but you can figure out partly what this is going to be. And we'll have suggestions. There's some stuff in there that some agencies, I think Mineral Resources is in there, which is an agency that was set up by executive order. It's not even in statute, yet it's talked about in statute because they have to fund it. So it's very strange. So we have some ideas about what that entire cut will be, but a large portion of it is going to be launched under the Workforce Development Council. So that is sort of Office of the Governor. The same thing really applies to self-governing agencies. There's a lot of growth in there. And as your viewers may know, there was an amendment that said you can only have 20 agencies. And then they made the Office of, self-governing agencies and then put a bunch of agencies under them. So that's what's going on with those sort of bigger line items there in the, self-governing and the Offices of the Governor. They have a lot of different and numerous sundry agencies under those. So that's what's kind of happening with there. You'll see. I'm looking for other big ones.
Well,
Idaho Public TV was one that jumped out at me, almost 25%.
Yeah, and that's
specifically a dedicated grant that they receive for certain educational. It was
the Millennium Fund?
It was
grant?
I believe so. It was some sort of grant of that nature. So what you see here, though, for Idaho Public Television is their budget from the state. About 2/3, from what I understand, of their money, $8 to $9 million, is all private funded, continuously appropriated donations to a Idaho Public TV, organization, trust, nonprofit type thing. This is only money from the state. So a lot of this supports. Right now, once this dedicated grant doesn't support anything to do with the emergency broadcasting or Idaho Public TV or, Capital Television. This was specifically a grant for a program
it might
to
have
produce
been smoking
content.
cessation or
yeah,
something.
that's what it was.
Yeah.
It was that campaign. So that's a cut and it looks gigantic, but it's actually their whole budget isn't pictured here, and it's not to critical services. It's specifically for content.
Yeah, you mentioned continuous appropriation, and I guess I'll close by asking about some of the structural changes you're recommending to the budgeting process.
Yeah, so I spoke about that at the end of my speech. It was about the last page, or about last quarter, was talking about the structural process. And I think that line items and everything, this is important. We need to pursue this. We have to get these cuts because the budget it's not going to work this year. But in the long term, also looking at the structural problems in the budget and really how it's reduced is where you're going to see sustainable savings. So continuous spending is something that the legislature does, and it's not inherently bad or evil or anything, but the way it's been used since really over these about decade, would you say?
Particularly the last few
years, is they move hundreds and hundreds of millions into continuous appropriations, which they just get, it's every year, it's just appropriated. It's strange to even call it an appropriation because they don't really, there's no bill that says, this money goes there. It's just in statute somewhere that says, $125 million to the building fund for schools every single year just goes in based off, they get it from sales tax usually. And it just continues. And it's hard to find in the budget sometimes. Sometimes it's not even in the budget book they produce. It's outside of it. It just doesn't it exists, but it's not actually totaled up in the budget.
Yeah, I'll give you a couple just to clarify for your viewers. So there's lava hot springs. If you go back to the budget book 6 or 8 years ago, there's actually a section on lava hot springs. When it was made continuous, it actually disappeared from the budget book. So we don't even know what it spends. I mean, you'd have to go to Lava Hot Springs board and get a copy of the budget. So that's a type of continuous appropriation with actually, no oversight or visibility. You do have continuous appropriations that are subsets of agencies. So for example, with schools, some of the money for building maintenance has now been made continuous. So effectively what happens is money can directly come from the sales taxes every year without a bill or legislative oversight. The amount of money they've directed, and it'll just go right to the schools. And the problem with that is if you increase continuous appropriations every year, it makes the growth of spending look smaller, right? Because it's not added to the percentage change. And so you can say, gee, we only grew spending 2%. When it might have been 4 or 5 if you added back the continuous. And then so that's one problem, obviously. The second problem, what you can't see, you can't manage. And so what we've suggested, and I don't want to say that we're the only ones, JFAC actually had a comprehensive presentation at their last meeting on continuous appropriations. And so you can go to their website, you have to do a little digging, and you can see the extent of the continuous appropriations. So they are now going to put it back in the budget book. What isn't clear is this going to be a backwards look, or are we going to see it going forward as a request, or at least as a amount that's projected, like with other budgets? So it's one thing to know what it was 3 years ago or 2 years ago, but what is it going to be a year from now? And that's what we're advocating for, is that they should see that, so that when they budget for an agency, they understand the totality of the spending, including the off-budget continuous appropriations.
Yeah, well, I'm optimistic. I don't know if we'll, get 1.9 billion in cuts, but hopefully we'll get in the right direction this year. And I'm glad that people are talking about these things and presenting tools for people to get more involved. This is a huge. It's hard to even conceive of $14 billion, much less $40 trillion at the federal level.
I don't think anyone conceives at the federal level what's going on.
Fred Birnbaum, Brett Farruggia, Idaho Freedom Foundation, thank you for your time.
And thank you. One thing, stay tuned. We'll provide more information as we get closer to the session, so that it'll be a little more granular for your viewers, so that it'll make a little more sense. Right now, we've just shown it at a high level, but we'll provide more information as we go forward.
I'm currently working on collating that sort of. It'll be kind of like a budget book. I mean, it's not going to be 500 pages, but it'll have a page or two on each agency, and there'll be recommend there'll be the cuts in our budget, and then other sort of things that we think, hey, we didn't put this in our budget, but if you want to look at cuts, it could be this, that, or that. So I'm working my way through that right now. So next couple days here, you might see it.
Great. I'm looking forward to it, and I'll keep my eye out.
Thank you.
And I'm back. Thank you again to Fred Birnbaum and Brett Farruggia for taking the time to talk with me and explain what's going on behind their budget. It's very easy for us on the outside to say, well, you just need to cut spending. Cut spending, cut spending, cut spending. It's harder to actually say, well, exactly where should we cut spending? Where should we reduce the budget? And so I appreciate the work they've done on this, going through line by line to figure out where we can actually find some cuts. Obviously, the big chunk of their cuts is in Medicaid expansion. As you might recall, in 2018, voters of Idaho approved Medicaid expansion, which was a component of Obamacare. I'll just do a quick overview here. Medicaid was created as part of Lyndon Johnson's Great Society, 1960s. It's a federal-state partnership to provide medical coverage, healthcare coverage for certain groups of people: elderly, disabled, children, pregnant mothers. And usually it depends on the average income of the state, but the federal government will pay like 70% and the state will pay 30% or whatever. With Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, they create this new thing called Medicaid expansion. It's for people who are not part of those groups, but are otherwise underneath a certain income threshold. And the federal government pays 90% and the states pay 10%, no matter the income. And so that's how it was sold to us. It's basically free money. The state only has to pay 10% and the federal government pays the rest. Of course, turning aside from the fact that that's all our money anyway, whether in the form of direct income taxes to the federal government or in the inflation that occurs when the federal government prints more money, it's also, a hole with no bottom. They sold it as, it's only going to be like $400 million. Well, now the Medicaid expansion budget is well over $1 billion, federal and state. And it keeps going because you start creating incentives for people to become part of this group, to qualify for this benefit. And that's the trap. And I've written about this before. That's the Kafka trap of benefit programs, is that once they exist, they are incentivized to expand coverage to as many people as possible. So if you recall last week, Representative, I know the DOGE committee has been talking about looking at Medicaid expansion as well. So I think we're going to see some debate on that this year. I'll be right back. Money Metals is not only a great local business right here in Eagle, it is arguably the premier precious metals dealer and depository in the country. With a vault twice the size of Fort Knox, Money Metals is your source for gold, silver, and any other precious metal that holds value as our dollar continues its decline. Visit moneymetals.com to learn more, place an order, or check out their articles and podcasts on the concept of sound money. Thank you, Money Metals, for supporting the Gem State Chronicle. So, here we are, 1 month from the start of the 2026 legislative session. It's going to be a big year. Not only do we have this budget issue that our legislators are going to have to address, we've got immigration. We've got numerous other things that are going to come up as well. That's going to be the capstone of a very busy start to the year for me and a lot of other people. The Idaho Republican Party winter meeting is on Friday the 9th and Saturday the 10th of January. All of us who are part of the Idaho GOP State Central Committee are going to come together at the Harvest Church in Meridian, and we're going to discuss resolutions, rule changes, who's going to be the honorees of the Idaho GOP Hall of Fame Awards, and all sorts of other things. You are invited. Just go to idgop.org. There's a big banner on top of the homepage. You can sign up to attend as a guest, and you'll get to see how some of the sausage is made at the party level. And those resolutions that are passed by the State Central Committee will then be given to our legislators. out of the 105 legislators in the Idaho State Legislature, the House and the Senate, 90 of them are Republicans. Well, so we have a massive supermajority. Now, obviously, not all of them have conservative values. Not all of them vote along what we would call a conservative line, but a lot of them do. Enough of them that when the party speaks, they will listen. And so on the morning of January 12th, Monday, before the governor makes his speech, Idaho GOP chairwoman Dorothy Moon will speak in the Lincoln Auditorium, and she will present the state party's agenda for the upcoming session. And that is defined by the resolutions that are going to be passed at the winter meeting. So that's all going to be some exciting stuff. If you have the opportunity to take off work or spend the day down at the Capitol on the 12th, it's a lot of fun. I'm going to be there. I hope I'll see you too. It always feels like the first day of school, coming back after summer break, because you're back, everybody's back in the same room, seeing your friends, seeing people who may not be your friends. But it's fun. It's also a different environment because the session is so short. So once they get going, they really cram a lot of work into just a very short time. So I'm going to do one more ad read here because I did not space them very well throughout the rest of the program, but I want to get to all three, and then I'll be back with some closing thoughts. New St. Andrews College is a different kind of higher education. It harkens back to the traditions of scholarship, excellence, and devotion that colleges and universities once embraced before they discarded those things for today's woke indoctrination. New St. Andrews, right here in Moscow, Idaho, develops leaders who shape our culture by living faithfully under the lordship of Jesus Christ. Learn more at nsa.edu. Thank you, New St. Andrews, for supporting the Gem State Chronicle. And thank you, too, to everybody who is a supporter via a paid subscription over at Substack. Remember, you can go to gemstatechronicle.com, click the subscribe button at the top, put in your email, you can sign up for free, or you can choose to support this platform and the work I do. Thank you to my sponsors. Thank you to everybody who's written me notes of encouragement over the years, especially over the past year. It's been crazy times. Thank you also to Fred and Brett from Idaho Freedom Foundation for taking the time to talk to me today. Thank you to you for watching. Remember to go subscribe at gemstatechronicle.com. Go there to check out Idaho Insider and especially the Scorecard Explorer. See how your favorite legislators or least favorite legislators rate on the various scorecards. If you have an idea for a scorecard I haven't included, send it my way. Editor at gemstatechronicle.com. I'd be happy to include it. It's much easier to add now that it's all on the back end. I don't have to manually update 105 pages. So yeah, go check that out, especially as the session gets going. I think Idaho Insider will be a very valuable resource as you keep track of things. Remember also, here, let me share this with you real quick. Screen share, Gem State Chronicle. There we go. Remember also, so if you go over to the resources page, I have a lot of, resources. I have a page that has a bunch of different ways you can email the legislature. Choose you want to email the Senate Agricultural Affairs Committee, and it'll just insert that into your own email program's BCC block. We want to be careful not to do too many of those because it can get flagged as spam, but it has the advantage of not going through some third-party server. And so when it arrives in the inboxes of your legislators, it's literally just from you. I'm not inserting anything. I'm not tracking anything. I'm not collecting emails. There's no way for me to collect emails through this method because all it's doing is throwing it in your own program. I think that's a great way to do it. Other things up here. The committee daily summary. Once the committees start, you'll see what their schedule is for each day. I put this page together last year, Watch the Legislature. It's the video feeds of every single committee room plus the House and Senate floors. So as each one is going on, you can just watch them here. Obviously, it's not going to work now because they're not in session, but it's a very quick way. And I honestly put this together for me to use. On the days I'm not at the Capitol, I'm sitting right here with multiple videos on my screens, keeping track of what's going on so I can let you know what you need to know. So yes, great stuff here. Check it out. Yeah, let me remove that. And I hope you have a great weekend, a great week next week. I will be back one more time on the 19th before taking a couple of weeks off for Christmas break and then New Year's. And then, of course, the winter meeting. I'll be at Harvest Church of Meridian with the rest of the Idaho GOP and getting stuff done on the night of Friday the 9th. But then I will be back again once the session starts. So one more episode this month, and then we'll take a few weeks off and rejoin at the start of the session. So I'm looking forward to getting some more interviews next week, writing some more stories. There's a lot of stuff going on. I'll do my best to distill it for you. So thank you so much for your support. Thank you for watching. And I will see you later.